You put thought into all you do, and that means a lot to me and my family.
An attack, I guess to kill.
Some crimes are so shocking they defy comprehension, but when committed by kids, the courtroom becomes a stage for raw emotion and haunting reactions. From unflinching indifference to tearful breakdowns, these moments reveal the weight of justice. Let's have a look at child convicts' shocking reactions to their sentences. Jamarian Lawhorn.
If I could go back, I would stop myself. I now realize the nightmare that you and I have to live with.
On August 4th, 2014, a crime that seemed incomprehensible rocked the city of Kentwood, Michigan. Jamarian Lawhorn, just 12 years old, fatally stabbed 9-year-old Connor Verkerka in a playground. Connor was playing with his younger brother and a group of children when Jamarian approached, brandishing a kitchen knife he had taken from his home. Without warning or provocation, he attacked Connor, stabbing him multiple times in the back. Connor managed to run home, collapsing on his front porch as his younger brother screamed for help. Despite his parents' desperate efforts to save him, Connor tragically succumbed to his injuries. The crime was chilling not only for its brutality, but also for its apparent randomness. Jamarian and Connor did not know each other. As the details of the case unfolded, it became evident that the motive behind the act was rooted in Jamarian's harrowing personal circumstances. Raised in a household rife with abuse and neglect, Jamarian had endured years of physical and emotional trauma. His mother and stepfather frequently beat him, leaving him with a deep sense of despair and isolation. When questioned, Jamarian made a startling confession. He had murdered because he wanted to be arrested and taken away from his abusive home. "I wanted someone to take me away from my dad," he told investigators. This tragic statement highlighted the extreme lengths to which a child, consumed by hopelessness, might go to escape a life of suffering. The courtroom trial for Jamarian Lawhorn was a deeply emotional and complex affair. At the center was a 12-year-old boy who had committed a heinous act, but whose life had been marked by relentless abuse. Initially, Jamarian appeared calm and detached during the proceedings, an unsettling contrast to the raw grief displayed by Connor Verkerka's family. As testimony about his upbringing was presented, however, Jamarian's demeanor began to shift. Witnesses recounted the beatings and neglect he had suffered at the hands of his mother and stepfather. One of the most poignant moments came when Jamarian's mother testified. She admitted to regularly hitting her son and acknowledged that his stepfather had been violent as well. Her words painted a picture of a household steeped in dysfunction, where Jamarian's cries for help went unheard. Connor's family, meanwhile, was resolute in their demand for justice. Their heartbreaking testimonies about Connor's life and the void left by his death added an overwhelming weight to the trial. Connor's father, overcome with emotion, pleaded for the court to hold Jamarian accountable, describing the unimaginable pain their family had endured. The most striking moment of the trial came during sentencing. Jamarian, who had maintained a stoic facade throughout much of the proceedings, finally broke down in tears. The reality of his actions and the impact they had on both families seemed to fully sink in. It was a haunting moment that captured the profound tragedy of the case, a young boy who had caused immeasurable pain to escape his suffering.
For all the pain I have caused throughout the whole process, I have had days without eating because when that happened.
Given Jamarian Lawhorn's age and the circumstances surrounding the crime, the court faced a difficult decision. He was convicted of first-degree murder, but sentenced to a juvenile facility until the age of 21, with a focus on rehabilitation. The sentence acknowledged the severity of his crime, while also addressing the underlying issues of abuse and neglect that had shaped his actions. Jamarian was placed in a highly structured environment, where he received therapy and counseling to address his trauma. Reports from the facility have noted his active participation in these programs, as well as his progress in academics and behavior. Despite the progress, questions remain about whether the intervention came too late.
I'm ordering that Jamarian be remanded to juvenile detention.
Nathaniel Jouet.
Holding the weapons and the ammunition on social media while he was in the library.
On August 28, 2017, the quiet town of Clovis, New Mexico, was shattered by an unthinkable act of violence. Nathaniel Jouett, a 16-year-old high school sophomore, entered the Clovis Carver Public Library armed with 2 handguns. What followed was a senseless and devastating attack that left 2 people dead and 4 others injured. The victims included library employees and patrons who had been going about their day in what should have been a safe space. Jouett's attack was fueled by deep emotional struggles. In the months leading up to the shooting, he had been battling severe depression and suicidal thoughts. Witnesses later described how he had expressed feelings of hopelessness and anger, even discussing his desire to die by suicide by cop. According to Jouett's statements, he initially intended to take his own life, but instead decided to target others in what he described as a moment of blind rage. During the rampage, Jouett showed no hesitation. He opened fire indiscriminately, killing 2 librarians, Wanda Walters and Christina Carter, and injuring 4 others, including a 10-year-old boy. The library quickly became a scene of chaos as patrons scrambled to escape the gunfire. First responders arrived within minutes, apprehending Jouett without further incident. The attack left a profound impact on the Clovis community, which struggled to reconcile the violent act with the image of a young man many described as polite and soft-spoken. Jouett's classmates and teachers expressed shock, recounting how he had been involved in church activities and seemed to be seeking help for his struggles. However, beneath this exterior was a teenager grappling with untreated mental health issues, which ultimately culminated in tragedy. The trial of Nathaniel Jouett was marked by raw emotion and difficult questions about accountability and mental health. Jouett, who had pleaded guilty to the charges against him, faced the victims' families and the community in a packed courtroom. In a tearful statement during sentencing, Jouett expressed deep remorse for his actions. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused," he said, addressing the families of the victims directly. "I can't change what I've done, but I wish I could." His voice broke as he described how his depression had consumed him and led to a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. The courtroom audience had mixed reactions to Jouett's apology. Some family members of the victims found his words hollow, stating that no apology could ever bring back their loved ones. Others acknowledged his remorse but felt it did not excuse the devastating consequences of his actions. Perhaps the most poignant moment came when the mother of one of the deceased librarians spoke directly to Jouett. Through tears, she told him, "You took my daughter, and you took my best friend. I hope you think about that every day for the rest of your life." Jouett listened intently, his face a mixture of guilt and anguish. The emotional weight of the trial was compounded by testimony about Jouett's mental state leading up to the attack. His defense attorneys argued that his severe depression and lack of adequate mental health care played a significant role in the tragedy. Prosecutors, however, maintained that regardless of his struggles, he had made a choice to commit a premeditated act of violence and should be held fully accountable.
I want to start this off with an apology to Wanda Walters and Chrissy Carter's family and friends.
Nathaniel Jouett was convicted of multiple charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of aggravated battery, and tampering with evidence. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he received 40 years for the aggravated battery charges, underscoring the gravity of his actions. The sentencing brought a sense of closure to some, but for others, it raised lingering questions about how such tragedies could be prevented. Jouett's case highlighted the devastating consequences of untreated mental health issues in teenagers. Many wondered if earlier intervention or more robust mental health resources could have saved lives that day, including Jouett's.
This afternoon, a judge sentenced the teen who went on a shooting rampage in a Clovis library to life in prison.
Nathan Pape.
We were gonna try to scare her to get money and then use force if needed.
On September 17, 2012, a heinous crime shocked the small community of Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Nathan Pape, 13, and his friend Antonio Barbeau, 13, brutally murdered Barbeau's great-grandmother, 78-year-old Barbara Olson, in her own home. The the two teens devised the plan to kill Olson in the hopes of stealing money to fund their escapades. The murder was premeditated and shockingly calculated. The boys armed themselves with a hatchet and a hammer, entering Olson's house under the guise of a friendly visit. Once inside, they attacked Olson mercilessly, striking her multiple times with the weapons. After ensuring she was dead, the pair stole loose change, a small amount of cash, and her jewelry. To cover their tracks, Poppy and Barbeau attempted to stage the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. They loaded the stolen items into Olson's car and dumped the vehicle in a nearby parking lot. However, their plan quickly unraveled when Barbeau's family became suspicious of his behavior and called the police. Within days, both boys confessed to the crime, and the community was left grappling with the shocking reality of their actions. The senselessness of the murder, killing a beloved elderly woman for such a trivial gain, brought intense scrutiny to the case. It also raised difficult questions about the influence of peer pressure, the capacity for violence in young teens, and how the justice system should handle juvenile offenders who commit such horrific acts. The trial of Nathan Papp was marked by visible regret and emotional displays in the courtroom. While Antonio Barbeau appeared cold and detached throughout much of the proceedings, Papp's demeanor was starkly different. He often appeared overwhelmed, his face etched with guilt and sorrow. During his testimony, Papp expressed deep remorse for his actions, offering an emotional apology to Olson's family. "I'm sorry for what I did," he said through tears. "I wish I could take it back." His voice broke as he described how he had followed Barbeau's lead, claiming that he never intended for the plan to end in murder. Testimonies from Olson's family members added to the emotional weight of the trial. Her relatives described her as a kind and loving woman who had always gone out of her way to help others, including her great-grandson. They expressed disbelief and anger that such a violent act could come from two boys so young. One family member directly addressed Payape, saying, "You took someone we loved deeply and will never understand why." Papp's visible regret stood in contrast to Barbeau's chilling lack of emotion, leading some courtroom observers to speculate about the dynamics between the two boys. Prosecutors argued that while Papp may have been influenced by Barbeau, he still played an active role in the crime and should be held fully accountable. The defense, however, pointed to his young age and impressionability, suggesting that he was a follower rather than a leader.
In court, Papp gave a short apology before he was sentenced.
I just want to say that I'm truly sorry for everything that happened.
Despite his remorse, Nathan Pape was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide. Under Wisconsin law, juveniles charged with such a crime are automatically tried as adults. The judge sentenced Papp to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This meant he would not be eligible for release until he was in his mid-40s, a prospect that underscored the gravity of his actions. During the sentencing, the judge acknowledged Pappy's apparent regret, but emphasized the seriousness of the crime. "You made a choice, Nathan," the judge said, and that choice had devastating consequences. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read, with many reflecting on the tragic waste of both Olson's life and the futures of the two boys. Pape's case has since become a focal point in discussions about peer pressure and accountability in juvenile offenders. Experts analyzing the case noted how Pape's willingness to follow Barbeau's lead demonstrated the dangers of group dynamics, particularly among impressionable teens. While Pape expressed regret and remorse, the fact remained that he actively participated in the brutal murder.
It is our big story as well, a guilty verdict in a brutal murder in Sheboygan County. A jury has found 14-year-old Nathan Papp.
Kyle Anger.
I will be at that parole hearing.
On October 18, 2017, a group of 5 teens in Michigan turned a seemingly harmless prank into a deadly tragedy. Kyle Anger, 17, Mickaden Payne, 16, Trevor Gray, 15, Alexander Miller, 15, and Mark Sikelski, 15, gathered on an overpass on Interstate 75 near Flint, Michigan. They began throwing rocks at passing vehicles, a reckless act they saw as a prank. The situation escalated when Kyle Anger hurled a 6-pound rock that crashed through the windshield of a van, striking 32-year-old Kenneth White in the chest and head. White, who was riding home from work, died instantly from blunt force trauma. The vehicle's driver pulled over and called 911, but it was too late. White's death left his fiancée and their young child devastated, and the senseless nature of the crime sent shockwaves through the local community. Investigators quickly linked the teens to the incident thanks to witnesses and evidence at the scene. The group was arrested the following day and confessed to their actions. Authorities discovered that the teens had thrown over 20 objects from the overpass that evening, including a tire and other debris. While they claimed they didn't intend to harm anyone, the gravity of their actions was undeniable. The case highlighted the consequences of youthful recklessness and the devastating impact such behavior can have on innocent lives. Kenneth White's family, in particular, struggled to comprehend how a group of teenagers could engage in such a dangerous act without considering the potential consequences. The courtroom proceedings were emotionally charged as the teens faced charges of second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and malicious destruction of property. Their ages and the nature of the crime sparked debates about whether they should be tried as adults or juveniles. During the trial, the teens displayed a range of emotions. Kyle Anger, identified as the one who threw the fatal rock, appeared visibly shaken and remorseful. In a statement during sentencing, he broke down in tears, saying, "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I'm sorry for what I've done." His words, however, offered little solace to Kenneth White's grieving family. White's fiancée, Amy Cagle, delivered a heartbreaking victim impact statement. Through tears, she described the pain of losing her partner and the challenges of raising their child without him. "You robbed my son of his father," she said, directing her words at the teens. "Your actions have destroyed our family." The courtroom also heard from the families of the teens, who expressed disbelief and sorrow over the tragedy. The parents of Kyle Anger and his co-defendants pleaded for leniency, arguing that their children's actions were thoughtless but not malicious. Their emotional testimonies underscored the dual tragedy of the case: the loss of an innocent life and the ruined futures of 5 young boys. The prosecution emphasized the recklessness of the teens' actions, particularly Kyle Anger's decision to throw the heaviest rock. They argued that the teens knew their actions were dangerous and continued regardless. Defense attorneys countered by pointing to the teens' immaturity and lack of understanding about the potential consequences of their actions.
Teens will be sentenced as adults for throwing rocks off of an I-75 overpass, killing a man.
In the end, the court handed down varied sentences based on the teens' levels of involvement. Kyle Anger, being the oldest and the one who threw the fatal rock, received the harshest sentence of 39 months to 20 years in prison. The other 4 teens, who played supporting roles, were sentenced to probation and mandatory community service, with the possibility of expunging their records if they completed their sentences without further incidents. The sentencing sparked mixed reactions. Kenneth White's family expressed frustration, feeling that justice had not been fully served. "Kyle gets to go home one day," said White's fiancée, "but Kenneth never will." Meanwhile, advocates for juvenile justice reform viewed the sentences for the younger teens as appropriate, emphasizing the need for rehabilitation rather than punishment for minors.
4 out of the 5 juveniles involved in a rock-throwing case that killed 32-year-old Kenneth White faced a judge today.
Rachel Schoaf and Shelia Eddy.
By the federal authorities not to prosecute her federally, which is, I understand the law, they have every right to do.
The shocking murder of Skylar Neese by her best friends, Rachel Schoaf and Shelia Eddy, rocked the small town of Star City, West Virginia. On the surface, the 3 girls appeared inseparable, sharing a tight bond as they navigated the challenges of high school. However, beneath this facade, tensions simmered, ultimately culminating in betrayal and tragedy. On the night of July 5, 2012, Rachel and Shelia lured 16-year-old Skylar out of her home under the pretense of a late-night drive. They picked her up, drove her to a remote area in Pennsylvania, and, without warning, attacked her. Skylar fought desperately for her life, but the two girls overpowered her, stabbing her repeatedly. Her last words, reportedly, were a plea. Why? The motive behind the murder remains chillingly trivial. Rachel later confessed that the pair simply didn't want to be friends with Skylar anymore. Their decision to kill her, rather than drift apart naturally, stunned investigators and the community alike. After disposing of Skylar's body and attempting to cover their tracks, the girls returned home, continuing with their lives as though nothing had happened. For months, Shelia played the role of the grieving friend, posting heartfelt messages about Skylar on social media, and even helping with search efforts. Rachel, however, struggled to maintain the charade. Her growing guilt eventually led to a full confession in January 2013, which solved the truth about the murder. Rachel's admission not only shocked the Neese family, but also exposed Shelia's cold and calculated involvement. The courtroom proceedings were emotionally charged as Rachel Schoaf and Shelia Eddy faced justice for their roles in Skylar's murder. Rachel's demeanor during the trial contrasted sharply with Shelia's. While Rachel appeared remorseful, often breaking down in tears, Shelia remained stoic and unrepentant, her cold demeanor unsettling those in attendance. In a powerful moment during the trial, Rachel tearfully admitted to her actions, stating, "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope someday you can find it in your hearts to do so." Her emotional confession, though heartbreaking, did little to ease the pain of Skylar's parents, who viewed her as equally culpable. Skylar's father, Dave Neese, delivered a gut-wrenching victim impact statement. Addressing the court, he said, "You can never understand the pain of burying your child. These girls planned to kill our daughter for no reason. They stole her from us, and we'll never be the same." His words highlighted the profound grief and betrayal the Neese family endured.
You can remain seated if you want, as long as you're not on a rolling chair, so it's safe. All right.
Rachel Schoaf and Shelia Eddy were both charged with first-degree murder. In exchange for her cooperation and confession, Rachel received a plea deal, resulting in a sentence of 30 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 10 years. Shelia, who did not cooperate with authorities, received a life sentence, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The sentencing brought a measure of closure to Skylar's family, but the pain of their loss remains. "Justice was served," said Dave Neese, "but nothing will bring Skylar back." The Neese family has since dedicated themselves to advocating for victims' rights and raising awareness about teen violence. The case sparked widespread discussion about the capacity for remorse in young killers, while Rachel's emotional breakdown and confession suggested a level of guilt. Shelia's cold indifference left many questioning whether she truly understood the gravity of her actions. Psychologists analyzing the case pointed to the role of peer pressure and the lack of emotional maturity in understanding consequences.
Felony charged in the prosecutor's information in this case.
Martise Fuller.
And I know that I've barely showed emotion throughout my time, but in all honesty, it is because it's hard to have tears left.
In May 2019, Martise Fuller, a 15-year-old high school sophomore in Kenosha, Wisconsin, fatally shot his ex-girlfriend, Kaylee Juga. The crime shocked the local community, highlighting the tragic consequences of unresolved personal conflicts and controlling behavior in teenage relationships. Fuller and Kaylee had dated for over a year before their relationship became tumultuous. Friends and family reported that Fuller exhibited controlling tendencies, often demanding to know Kaylee's whereabouts and attempting to isolate her from her social circle. As tensions escalated, Kaylee ended the relationship, but Fuller struggled to accept her decision. On the day of the murder, Fuller entered the Juga family home armed with a stolen gun. He shot Kaylee multiple times in her bedroom before firing at her mother, who survived but suffered serious injuries. Fuller fled the scene, sparking a manhunt that ended with his arrest the next day. The crime was both premeditated and personal, driven by Fuller's inability to cope with rejection. Martise Fuller's trial in 2021 was a highly emotional affair, with the courtroom filled with supporters of Kaylee's family. Throughout the proceedings, Fuller maintained a stoic demeanor, showing little visible emotion as the prosecution detailed the events leading up to the murder. His lack of remorse, particularly in contrast to the overwhelming grief expressed by the Juga family, left a chilling impression on those present. The trial included heartbreaking testimonies from Kaylee's parents, who described her as a vibrant, loving teenager with a bright future. Her father, in a tearful statement, recounted the devastating moment he learned of her death. "She was my everything," he said, addressing Fuller directly. "You took her from us, and there's no coming back from that." The prosecution painted a harrowing picture of Fuller's controlling behavior, using text messages and witness testimonies to illustrate the toxic dynamics of his relationship with Kaylee. The evidence showed a pattern of possessiveness and anger that culminated in the fatal shooting. In his defense, Fuller's legal team attempted to argue for his age and immaturity as mitigating factors, suggesting that he was incapable of fully comprehending the consequences of his actions. However, the prosecution countered by emphasizing the premeditated nature of the crime, arguing that Fuller had ample opportunity to reconsider his actions but chose not to.
Friday, in Kenosha County Court, Kaylee's mother, Stephanie, shared how unimaginable the loss has been.
A Kenosha County jury has convicted Martise Fuller of killing his ex-girlfriend and attempting to kill her mother in 2019.
Martise Fuller was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in delivering the sentence, highlighted the calculated nature of Fuller's actions and the irreparable harm caused to Kaylee's family. "This was not a momentary lapse in judgment," the judge stated. "It was a deliberate act of violence that took a young life and shattered countless others." For Kaylee's family, the sentencing provided a measure of closure but no solace. "Nothing will bring her back," her mother said. "But we hope this serves as a warning to others about the dangers of toxic relationships and unchecked violence." The case of Martise Fuller sparked broader conversations about the warning signs of abusive relationships among teenagers. Experts emphasized the importance of education and intervention to prevent similar tragedies. Schools and community organizations in Kenosha have since implemented programs aimed at addressing relationship violence and providing resources for teens in crisis. The case of Martise Fuller and others reveals the devastating impact of teen violence, from broken families to shattered communities. These cases highlight the importance of addressing underlying issues, such as toxic relationships and untreated mental health struggles, to prevent future tragedies and support vulnerable teens before irreversible harm occurs. If you enjoyed these cases, then let us know your thoughts below, and make sure to watch our next ones, shown on screen.